Hey everyone, it's me, Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and I am so excited to kick off our newest free motion challenge quilting along mandalas. Throughout the video series, we're going to be working through the panel I designed exclusively for the challenge. I'm going to show you how to work your way through the quilt, show you some design options, and it's almost like a choose your own quilting adventure because I'm going to give you some different design options. So whether you're a brand new free motion quilter scared to get started or a machine quilter looking to up your quilting game, this video series is for you. And in this video, we're going to be working in the center of our mandala panel. We're going to talk a lot about echoing and how to use it to create different effects on your quilt. And I'm going to demonstrate how to quilt it on a sewing machine and a long arm. So let's get to it. All right, I have my quilt sandwich basted and ready to go. I've got my pretty purple backing fabric on it, which is also going to be the binding. It's going to be great. So looking at the center of my panel, I love this little green detail right in the center, but I'm a little worried it's going to get lost in the filler we're going to put around it. So what to do? Oh, echo. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I love echoing. And in this instance, we're going to use echoing to build up that smaller shape and help separate it from that background filler. And then on this side, we're also going to use echoing, but a slightly different variation of it to really build up that shape, to give it a little bit of wow, and also to make that space a little bit more manageable. Then we're going to fill in between them with some filler. Well, let me pull out my sewing machine and let's get to quilting. All right, I'm almost ready to start quilting, but before I do that, I just want to go over real quickly the things I'm going to be using for quilting on my sewing machine, because I know this is a very common question. First of all, I have my extension table on my machine. I always use that, just kind of gives me a bigger surface area to work with. Obviously optional, you don't have to have that. I have my machine quilting foot on here. You can use any FMQ foot that you have laying around, but I'm actually using my higher profile ruler foot because we're going to be seeing a little bit of rulers in there. But if you have a different one, that's totally fine. I have a nice Supreme slider down on top of my extension table that just kind of reduces the friction a little bit as I'm quilting. I've got my handy gloves, which I always quilt with. I just like how they give me a little bit more grip when I'm holding that quilt, but don't make my hands sweaty. And then lastly, I have some quilt clips. Now these are actually pretty wonderful. They kind of look like bracelets, but they actually serve a better purpose. I can roll up the bulk of my quilt, put the clip around it, and have it out of my way as I'm trying to focus on the center of this quilt. Now, of course, you don't have to have those to quilt. You just need to make sure you have a free motion foot, you have some thread, and something to quilt on. So once you've gathered all those supplies, it's time to get to the best part, the machine quilting. Before I echo my little motif in the center of my panel, I'm actually going to do a little bit of stitching along that seam or stitching in the ditch. And I'm just going to work my way just kind of around, making that petal flower shape. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to do this, but I kind of like how it looks and I like how it will make it pop, you know, kind of pop out with that echo around it. Now there's a lot of little detail on here. I'm not going to go around every little bit. I'm just going to treat this like a little petal. I'm just going to kind of come into the center, back out, and just work my way around. Now if you're quilting along with me on the panel, you can do this portion with your white thread, or if you're feeling a little brave, you can use your yellow. Now I know it's a contrasting color, but it's going to show up just a bit, but still blend in really nicely. But I'm actually going with a green thread so that you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm going to start in the center and then just work my way all the way around until I return to my starting point. Once I'm done with that stitching around the ditch, it's time to go right into my echoing. A more traditional type of echo, or the echoing that we might think of, is a quilted line that has the same shape as whatever you're echoing, and the spacing is consistent throughout the whole echo. Now, I'm kind of here towards the center, and I guess if I was trying to be precise, I would break thread, start a new line of quilting about 1/4 inch away, and then go right to my echoing. But I like to be a little bit more efficient with my quilting. So right from the center, I'm just going to kind of veer up and then go right into my echo. The trick to remember is that you want a smooth line. Even if my echo line isn't perfectly spaced out, a smoother line will look better than a crooked line. I always like spacing my line out about 1/4 inch because I can run the foot along that previously quilted line and it just kind of gives me a guide. But if you don't want the quilting too dense, you could make it 1/2 inch apart. Really, whatever you feel like doing, just try to keep it somewhat consistent throughout the echo. And I'm going to keep going until I arrive back at my starting point. Now we're starting to see a little bit of that echoing to build it up and kind of really draw attention to that area. You can add as many of these as you like, but for now we're going to leave it just at one because we're going to work our way to the other side of that center and start doing a different type of echoing. Instead of quilting that more traditional echo that has the spacing the same all the way through, I'm going to quilt my echo lines so that they touch a couple of the points. Now, just like we saw in the center, I'm going to start by stitching along that seam. Of course, you can leave that step out if you're newer to quilting or you just don't like to do that. And then I'm going to quilt my next line so that it swings out, echoes that shape, and then touches on the other side. I'm actually going to use a ruler to help me do that. I'm going to use my Smiley ruler that I designed for creative grids because I love how it makes it easy to get those nice arc shapes. But if you don't have a ruler or don't feel comfortable quilting with rulers, no worries. You can either mark out the line beforehand and quilt along it, or you can just freehand it. So while I'm quilting that curved line, I'm swinging out and I'm trying to end about, I don't know, a ½ inch or an inch away from that point. And then quilting that arched line to the next point on the other side. And because that was so much fun, I think I'm going to add another echo line. Quilting that line so that it kind of arcs out, ends about a ½ inch from the previously quilted point, and then touches that other side. I actually have an ulterior motive for quilting those echo lines so that they touch the points. It makes it easier to transition from one to the next and allows me to quilt more efficiently around my quilt. And just like any quilt or any design, there's different ways that you can go about quilting this. So for instance, if you want, you can do the one ring at a time, where I do all my stitching in the ditch, all the way around my mandala, and then add my next echo line, and add my next echo line. So kind of like where I'm quilting them in the round. This is perfect if the area you're quilting fits in your throat space easily, if you're the type of person that likes to do all of one thing and then move on to the next. But you can also approach it a slightly different way where we break it up into chunks. And just like I've done here, where I stitch in the ditch, added my echo lines, and then move on to the next section. So once I leave that area, it's already finished. It allows me to transition from section to section, working my way around that area. Approaching it this way is perfect for those that are working on an area that's bigger than your throat space, then you have to dance kind of back and forth. This is perfect if you have a lot of echo lines, and especially if you don't mind approaching it one section at a time. Ultimately though, there is no wrong way to approach it, just have fun with it. So if you're newer to free motion quilting or you don't want to spend a long time on this panel, you can actually leave this step out. Now that I have my plan of attack, it's time to finish the rest of these sections. If quilting with rulers is something that you're interested in, but you're not sure how to go about doing it, check out one of my previous free motion challenge quilting alongs, machine quilting with rulers. In that video series, I show you how to deal with all types of rulers, of course, all on a custom panel designed for that class. And just to show you that you can do this without a ruler, I'm going to go ahead and freehand these lines. Everything is still the same. I'm still moving smoothly, I'm looking ahead of where I'm going, and I'm just trusting my hands to get me there. But if you're quilting along on a long arm quilting machine, it's a little bit different on how you'll hold that ruler. So let's see what it looks like on the long arm. Quilting these designs on a long arm is pretty similar to quilting them on a sewing machine. The main difference is that on a long arm, we're not going to be able to change the orientation of our quilt. So we're going to have to get comfortable quilting the designs in all different directions and using the rulers in all different directions. Try not to let this stress you out though, just take your time, work through it, and I promise it's going to look great. The reason I love this style of echoing within this block is that it echoes that outer shape of that pretty yellow portion. So it's really kind of enhancing and drawing attention to that particular area, kind of building up that particular shape. Plus, it's taking that space in between the center motif and the outer yellow and kind of making it a little bit smaller and easier to manage. And it actually leaves me a little bit of gap in between the two sections of echoes. Now this is where you can add a little bit more custom quilting. I'm going to come back and actually add some filler in between those spaces to really make those echo lines pop out. Now it's not a really large area that I'm working with, so the filler I'm going to use has to be fairly small. So I think I'm going to do some swirls or maybe some pebbles. What that's going to do is that's going to give a nice contrast in between the filler and those echo lines and really make them pop. However, you don't have to do this. You're still getting that nice effect from those echo lines. It's still going to look great. It's totally up to you and whether you have the time and desire to add more quilting. And of course, even though I'm doing swirls, you can do any kind of filler you feel comfortable quilting. When you see the sample with thread color that blends in with the background, you really get a sense of the texture and the focus that the echoing brings to the center. Now I'm ready to move on to the next section. So far we've used echoing to build up smaller elements. We've used echoing in a non-traditional way to help us move around an area. And now we're going to apply echoing to this area in a slightly different way as well. Instead of echoing the whole thing, I'm just going to echo the top. And the reason I'm going to put echoing in this block isn't necessarily to make the space easier to manage or to keep it from getting overwhelmed. It's because I know if I echo the top of each one of them, it's going to create this effect where I have this beautiful kind of shape. I actually have a couple of different quilting options. One is a little bit quicker and one's a little bit more dense. So let's go to the first one. For this design option, we're going to incorporate echoing and then fill in the space with a plume feather. It's just one of those great designs that can really fill in irregular areas, especially ones that are pointy at the top and bottom. I'm going to show you how we can transition from one section to the next without breaking thread and making it nice and efficient. Now for the echoing on this next section, I'm actually going to use another ruler. I'm going to use the Taj ruler. But again, if you don't have a ruler or don't feel comfortable quilting with rulers, you know you can freehand this as well. The reason I'm picking Taj is because it already has that nice rounded kind of pointy shape that just almost looks like our panel. So starting at the edge, I'm going to start by echoing that shape, traveling, and then echoing back. You might think, oh, interesting, 2 echoes. I wonder why that is. Well, the main reason is that it brings me back to this side so I can move on and continue quilting. Now, once I have those 2 echo lines, it's time to fill in that space with the plume feather. But here's the thing about the plume feather. It starts and ends in the same spot. And that's actually really good because I want to be able to get to that block, quilt it, and then move on. So I'm going to travel along the edge, get to this point, and then quilt my plume feather. So in this particular area, I'm incorporating traveling to help me maneuver my way through the area and make it a little bit more efficient. Now, if you're newer to machine quilting and you're like, I am just trying to work on the whole breathing and quilting thing, you don't have to worry about that. You can tie off, start a new line of quilting, totally fine. Now that I'm where I want to be, it's time to quilt my plume feather. Now, we've actually seen this in a previous free motion challenge quilting along, so if you need a little bit of refresher, a little bit more instruction, you can check out that video. But the plume feather is going to start off with a nice wavy line that ends in a little curl. And then from that swirl, I'm going to come out to a point and then echo my way back. Now once I have that shape, I'm going to quilt my way down one side, quilting these lines that extend out kind of like a fern, and coming back. And then once I run out of room, I'm just going to get to that starting point and do the same on the other side. Echoing the spine, and then working my way back down, adding those ferns or that plume feather kind of shape. And don't be afraid to really extend those out to the edge and fill in that area. Now once I've quilted that plume feather, it's time to move on to the next. And just like I've already said, if you want to, you can start a new line of quilting, but I don't like to do that. I like to avoid as many tie-offs as possible, so I'm going to travel along the gold part to get to the next section and do the same. So I've worked my way around, I'm right where I can add my next set of echo lines, and then travel on and repeat quilting my plume feathers. Now, if you don't love the plume feather or you're finding it a little tricky to quilt, no worries. You could try putting a filler in that area, or you can quilt a nice big swirl. I can still echo the top of that area, travel, and then repeat, ending up on the same side I started, and then I'm going to travel down along that edge, again using a ruler, but you don't have to. And then in this area, I'm just going to quilt a nice swirl that kind of extends out, and I'm going to try to make that widest part of the swirl fit the widest part of the area, and then I'm going to echo my way back down to where I started. It's not going to have quite the dense look of that plume feather, but it's still going to be nice and quick, and it's still going to bring you back to where you started so that you can keep moving on, working your way around that mandala. For the next design option in this area, we're going to incorporate echoing, but in the more traditional way. We're going to echo all 3 sides of that area and add a pop of detail with some filler. It's really going to give it this custom kind of look and a beautiful texture. The drawback is it can take a little bit longer to quilt. But I'm going to show you how to do it on a long arm and give you some tips and tricks. For this option, we're going to be quilting a traditional echo. It's going to be a line that has the same spacing throughout the whole shape. Now I'm going to use a ruler to help me get that nice smooth shape, but if I didn't have one, I could just skip it. Just again, focusing on keeping that line smooth and not worrying so much about it being perfect. Once I have my echo line quilted, I'm going to go ahead and fill the area inside with a filler design. Now if I'm taking the time to start a new line of quilting and quilt the echo, I'm going to go ahead and use an interesting filler. I'm quilting some dense swirls and throwing in some leaves and pebbles, but it really doesn't matter what you put in this space, just as long as you have something nice and consistent in texture. And since I know I'm going to break thread or tie off and move to the next section, it doesn't really matter where I end up in that area. So once I've filled it in, I'm just going to tie off and move to the next spot. And when I'm done, I have that beautiful kind of traditional echoed look and that dense texture inside, and I just love how it's going to look when it's all finished. In this video, we've learned how to use echoing in several different ways. Whether we've used it to build up smaller areas to separate it from the filler, or went with a non-traditional echoing just to make it a little bit more efficient. You can even make a nice traditional echo to add a pop of texture to your quilt and also to draw attention to particular areas. Okay, now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on the custom panel I designed for the challenge, quilt the very center of the mandala with the designs of your choice. You can use the ones I've shown you in the video or come up with your own. And it's not too late to get your own mandala panel. I have it available in 2 sizes. Just click the link in the description box below to find out all the details about the challenge. And to help you out, I've put together some free quilting diagrams. Simply download them and keep them next to you as you quilt. And if you want a little bit more help, a little bit more instruction, you can get the expanded resource PDF with even more designs and even more diagrams. I just want to make sure you have everything you need to be successful with the designs we've learned in this video. To learn more about this free motion challenge quilting along, or to get the products you've seen in this video, be sure to click the link in the description box below. And I'll be back next week with the second video where we'll talk about how to quilt this area of our mandala. I can't wait. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.